props. You know, when they want to make a crowbar, they do this kind of thing, so that's a plastic crowbar.
If you haven't picked up one of these papers, please pick one up. As long as a pencil, you'll need it for later on. Yes, something to write.
I saw the we just did a state
what is that, the purple platypus guys that do stuff?
Oh, I don't know. I do
Yeah, they get to a point where it does they can make those flags and stay around circuit board.
Oh, is that right?
Same time. I'm gonna make a flag.
Yeah, most of the stuff is prototype. Well, I could prototype.
Especially for people that's kind
Okay.
It's, yeah.
Hello,
Yeah, you can paint the stuff.
Danny. Let me know when you're ready. Good now? Hi, good evening. Happy Valentine's Day. Look at all my Valentines who'd rather be here with us than out there. Exactly. The $10 you saved here probably still saved you from roses and candies and all the other garbage. That's right. Now, I'm right where I want to be because I don't want to be doing any of that other stuff either. So we're all in great company. So welcome. First of all, we always want to welcome AMN Healthcare for being our sponsoring host, giving us access to this wonderful room and these great facilities. So, as always, we definitely and gratefully appreciate them. We're going to probably jump right into things tonight. One, because I want to get you all home early and safely with this weather. And just in case you have a little something going on later, you'll have time. Tonight's topic is Manufacturing 101, how to select the best manufacturing processes and sources. That presentation is going to be hosted by Michelle Nashhoff. She is a longtime member of our group and has presented on this topic many times. It's very informative whether or not you yourself are going to take your product to market through the manufacturing process or whether you're going to work with a manufacturer to take your product to market. It's always good to know a little bit about the process in either case. Definitely if you're going to be doing it on your own, there's a lot more that you need to know. Michelle will touch on a lot of that information for you. She also has books available that she'll talk about, and also her lending her services to you as you go through the manufacturing process. I failed to mention, my name is Leslie Wagner. I am the president of San Diego Inventors Forum. Let's see, who else do we have? Tom is here tonight and a few others. So pretty much without further ado, I want to jump into the topic and then we'll do some other kind of housekeeping topics and discussions. We'll have a networking session later. We'll have a brainstorming session, and there'll be a session on, who needs who, what information you might need from others, what resources you might be looking for, how might we offer other help to you. So I want to jump into it. Michelle, I'm going to let you take over. We don't have a controller, so you'll just have to get your little...
Great. Good. Well, as Leslie mentioned, I've been in the manufacturing industry since I started as an engineering secretary at age 18. And then went back to college and got a degree, and I've been part of startup companies as well as a mentor to startup companies through the Connect Springboard program. So I have a lot to share. I've actually sold manufacturing services, ways to fabricate mechanical parts for over 30 years. So I've sold probably most of the main processes for making a mechanical part of a product. So that's what I'm sharing tonight. Let's see here. Okay. So we know from this Inventors Forum and all the 40 other groups around the country, there is no lack of ingenuity in developing and inventing new products. The problem is that most of the time, these companies don't succeed in getting their product out to market. And even after they start a company, over a period of 5 years, the Small Business Administration statistics are that 80% of companies will fail. So how can you avoid failure? Know as much as you can about what you're going to do. And you have to, if you don't know it all, and nobody does, you need to find the experts that know what you don't know how to do. So knowing how to create a product doesn't mean you know how to manufacture it or get it to market. So to get it started, you need to recognize what you know and what you don't know. So you can use experts that have product design and engineering abilities, patent and licensing like Leslie talked about last month. We have material selection, getting your product prototyped, getting into production manufacturing, and then the marketing of it. Those are all the different factors of getting your product from your head out into your target audience and customer base. So there's many ways to manufacture a part for a product. You can have parts that are sub-assemblies of a product that you can subcontract out to vendors. You can have parts in and made by vendors that come into you where you're going to do the main manufacturing. You can select a contract manufacturer to do turnkey manufacturing, to be able to get all the parts from different vendors, and then they do the assembly and get your product totally ready for the market. And you can be a fully integrated manufacturer and do everything yourself, but that's pretty much hard to do now because of the cost of equipment. Manufacturing processes have become so specialized that the kinds of equipment you need to make a part in a certain way can be way too expensive for you to buy. Even the auto manufacturers that used to be very vertically integrated 100 years ago when Henry Ford started his company are now outsourcing parts and assemblies instead of being vertically manufacturing companies. In fact, there's only a few very vertically manufacturing companies here in San Diego County because they've learned that they can save money by outsourcing parts and assemblies to other manufacturers that have the right equipment and the right know-how to make that part. So, for example, a metal part. There's several ways just to make a metal part. It can be machined. This screen is very, very tiny. Can we make this screen bigger? I can't read it. I can hardly read this at all.
It's a plastic.
Yeah, plastic, okay. You can have plastic parts that are machined. They have to be very simple geometry because you can't do anything really intricate when you're doing a machined plastic part, and there's a limitation of materials. You can vacuum and pressure form the part, but then you have to have the material supplied to you in sheets. You can injection mold a plastic part. You can blow mold it. There's also rotational molding. These are all different special processes of making plastic parts that use specialized equipment to make the part in that process. There's composite materials, and there's different ways of making composites, whether it's a layup out of layers of composite material that are actually, have adhesive, and they get heated, and they get, in an oven. And then there's molded parts and spun parts. Golf club shafts are made out of composite materials. So there's a lot of different parts that are made in special ways using these special different processes. So, oops, that didn't go. Okay. So this is an example of a part that could be vacuum formed or it could be injection molding. The difference between them are that injection molding, the material is actually heated to a liquid point and then injected into a tool, whereas the vacuum form parts have a sheet of material that's drawn into a mold, but you have the limitations as far as the complexity of what can be vacuum formed. It's good for starting off with low volume where you don't have the thousands and thousands of dollars to get into injection molding. And sometimes if it's a large part like an enclosure, it may be more economical to stay as a vacuum and pressure form part because you never have the volume to justify the expensive tooling to get into injection molding.
I'm going to try something real quick.
Okay.
Is it better for you?
Yeah, that's a little better. Okay. Rubber parts. I've been selling rubber molding for 30-some years, and you can cast a part out of urethane and RTV silicone. You can do compression molding, transfer molding, dipped parts. The plastic glove or the rubber gloves that you wear for surgical, those are often made by dipping. You can have plastic extrusions. Extrusion is where the material goes through a tool and comes out as a long, long strip and has different profiles. And then you can have injection molding of rubber. You can have liquid injection molding where the rubber is actually turned into a liquid material and injected into a tool similar to plastic molding. And you could do transfer molding. So there's lots of different ways to make parts using this process. And here's some of them that can be made in different ways. Most of these parts, when they have more of a geometry, that was where they have to be molded. If they're a flat part and they don't have a three-dimensional kind of geometry. It can be die cut out of just rubber material, and that's usually the cheapest way to go, because like a die for doing die cutting can be as cheap as $150, where the mold for a rubber part is going to be in the thousands, although it's less expensive than plastic molding because rubber doesn't have the same high temperatures and pressure that plastic molding, so the tooling is usually about half as expensive. Metal parts has the most variety of any other way to make a part. It can be cast, and there's several kinds. I've sold all the different kinds of castings: sand casting, permanent mold casting, rubber plaster mold casting, V-process casting, and die casting. They start off at low volume for the sand and permanent mold up to the die casting, which is almost like metal injection molding versus plastic injection molding. So you can imagine that the tooling has to be, really hard tool steel that can withstand the, the pressures and the temperature of casting of aluminum or zinc or brass. And then there's chemically etched parts. Yes?
What's V-process?
V stands for vacuum, so it's under vacuum process. And that reduces porosity. Because anytime you cast something, you have air coming into the part as part of the casting process. So drawing a vacuum means you have less porosity. You can have deep drawn or hydroformed for a part that has depth to it. You can fabricate from sheet metal, which again is like sheets of sheet metal that are made by a turret press or a laser cutter, and then formed after they're stamped into the net shape. You can have them stamped, where you have an actual tool that stamps the main shape of the part, and then you have forming afterwards to get all the little bends and twists that you have for a stamped part. You have forgings, which are made out of very high pressure tooling with a real force of tonnage to make that part, and it's very, very compressed, so it's the strongest method of having a very strong metal part. You can laser cut sheets of material, and then you have it formed afterwards. You can water jet cut. Water jetting can do lots thicker parts. You can do several inches with water jet cutting, or you can have stacks of material and do several parts at once. So that I even had somebody designing jewelry, and they had the parts water jet cut in different kinds of metals, and then they formed them afterwards to be the intricate jewelry. So it was interesting. There's machine parts that are made by machining centers. They can be lathes or mills. These are different ways of making parts. You can have plasma cutting is usually a lot of aerospace kind of parts, maybe plasma, and I've never sold plasma cutting, so I don't know the actual process to do plasma cutting. It's the one I know the least about.
Plasma cut is with a 4,000 degree torch.
Okay, great. So here's some metal parts. When you're looking at a metal part, you have to look at the shape, whether it has a complex geometry, to decide what you can do with it, because one part could be made in several ways depending on the volume, how many parts you need, the production volume. You could start out as a sheet metal part or a laser cut part and form it, and then as your quantity increases, you could change it to a stamped part where you'll save on the piece price and have some tooling costs. And then when you get into a more complex geometry part, the different kinds of castings are beneficial for that, and you can start out low with sand casting, and as your volume increases, it might be worthwhile to change into die casting. So there's many variables to consider when you're selecting the right manufacturing process. First of all, you need to think about Well, what's the environment going to be for the end product? Who's going to be using it? Where are they going to be using it? Are they going to be using it in an office? Are they going to be using it in an industrial plant setting? Is it going to be used outside? Is it for sporting goods? Is it, recreational purposes? Is it going to be a marine product? So those are the kinds of things you have to know when you're designing your product to be able to select the right manufacturing process. So if you don't have any idea, you need to do some investigation to figure out what's your target market, who's going to buy your product, how are they going to use it. Is it going to have any kind of certifications for the material? Or if it's a medical product, that's where you have to go through a long process to get it approved for medical use. So you have to think of if it's a product with regards to electricity or lighting, you have to have it UL approved. And if it's going to be sold to the military, it has to comply with military specifications. So these are all things you have to think of when you're designing your product and what you're going to be, who your target market is, but also what production. Most of the parts that are in most of the business, between business to business and manufacturing, they are selling to other businesses. Most of the customers are other businesses versus the consumer. So there's supposed to be something like 500,000 manufacturers in the country. 98% of them are small businesses under 500 people. 85% of them are under 100 people. Those kinds of companies are selling to other businesses versus to consumers. So it's really only 2 or 3% of the companies that manufacture in the United States that are actually selling directly to consumers for their mass market. So you can see why we are really a country of small businesses. San Diego's ratio is 97% of all manufacturers in San Diego County, according to a survey by the San Diego Workforce Partnership, are actually under 50 people. So that's the majority of San Diego manufacturers are selling to other businesses versus selling to consumers. So we have new technologies now in the last 30 years called additive manufacturing or 3D printing. It started out with stereolithography, which was the most simple of the processes to create your prototype. It was limited at the beginning to only plastic materials, and you had a real limited selection of plastic materials. But now we have so much more. The technology has just escalated in advancements in the last 5 years to the point that during the course of this year, will probably have a meeting just about additive manufacturing, talking about all the various processes that you can use. And now we have laser sintering, which is now getting into 3D printing for metal parts. I had the pleasure of being a mentor for a new additive manufacturing for metal parts last year by the name of Formaloid. They're a company here in San Diego, and they have a proprietary nozzle to have the powder metal material directed out of the nozzle at the laser to turn it into the part. And so you can use different materials of layers, and you can actually clad a part made in one material with another material. So there's all kinds. You can go to the trade shows like the FabTech show and the WestTech show, and even last week's show up in Anaheim with the medical design and manufacturing. The show was like 5 shows in one: automation show, medical show, design show, Westpac for packaging, and they had a lot of these kinds of technologies on display, and it's mind-boggling now. I've attended every workshop I could go to in the last 5 years on the different additive manufacturing processes, because it is the biggest change now in what you can use to get your product into market faster, because you can now have your product made in one process for your prototype. And many times now with the new technologies, they can make multiple parts at the same time. At last year's FabTech show, they had a new machine by Hewlett-Packard that actually can make several metal parts all at the same time. So you're not just making one at a time, you can make several at a time out of this bed of powder. So there's really interesting, but it's saving money for you because you don't have to have all these different parts that are going to be made for your product made by each little vendor making a part and putting it all together. You can get a prototype of your product made all by additive manufacturing in many cases, and that way you can get your working prototype faster to be able to go to the next step for getting investors and raising money, maybe through Kickstarter. These are all subjects we'll be covering in additional meetings during the course of the year. So I'm not going to go into, this is not, I'm learning as much about it, but I'm not the expert to be able to go into all the various processes for additive manufacturing, but I'm just trying to get you interested in the idea that you now can really, really accelerate your development time by using additive manufacturing, 3D printing to make your product. And there's some also, go back a little bit here. There are places that you can go to try things out. We have maker spaces where they have the equipment that you can go. And the maker place in San Diego is down on Marina Boulevard. That's what it's called, the maker place. There's one in North County in Carlsbad. The abbreviation is OSML, and I can't ever remember exactly what it stands for. But there's one in Carlsbad that I visited and wrote about, and that's a makerspace. But many of the community colleges now have also maker spaces, and Miracosta College has a technology center, and Palomar College was developing one, and even Federal Express and libraries are now having the less expensive 3D printing machines that you can use. So, and then there's service bureaus. But over the last 5 years, a lot of the service bureaus that you could contract to have a 3D printed part made are now switching over to selling the equipment, because more and more companies have bought their own 3D printers and they weren't making enough money as a service bureau, so they had to sort of branch out into selling the equipment instead of just being a service bureau to make the parts. That's the new trend. We had a company in Poway called Solid Concepts, and they started out just as a service bureau to make 3D, additive manufactured parts, and they were bought by one of the equipment companies, and they're now, selling the equipment and not just being a service bureau. So we have contract manufacturers like A Squared Technologies. See, some of the main ones here are CalComp, Clarity Design, DD Studio, D&K Engineering, Dynapack, Expert Engineering. These are just a few of the many contract manufacturers that you have available, where you can, some of them have the whole service. They have design engineers that you can work with, all the way to helping you get your product to market, like D&K. And we have, companies that you contract with them, and they actually, like D&K gets a portion of your profits. And they actually developed 2 of the products for 2 of our customers as sales rep company, that they actually did do the whole thing from the designing to now production for their products. But there's individual engineering designers in addition to these contract manufacturers. So there's expertise, like we have one right here in our audience, Chris. He is one, and for other specialties, Jim. Right, so we have, and sometimes we have more. Are there any other design engineers here tonight?
There's Danny in the back.
Okay, Danny in the back, okay. And actually contract manufacturer, because he's with A Squared Technologies now. So we have a lot of availability right here within our own community. So here's the makerspace I was talking to you about. Think of it as like your garage shop. You can go and you can actually take classes and be instructed in how to use particular equipment. So they have woodworking, metalworking, electronics, embroidery, sewing, specialty tools. And some of them sort of function like an incubator where you could have even rent a little space for you storing your supplies. So they're almost like a little incubator for your company. We do have an abundance of incubators and accelerators. Incubator is where you actually have a facility to go start your company. EvoNexus is one that specializes in telecommunication companies. Connect Springboard program is like an incubator without walls. It helps you develop your company, but it has to be a technology-based company, and you have to go through a screening process to get accepted into their program, and they help you. You have mentors, like I was doing, that have different specialties that help the people. So the Connect Springboard program, but we have also shared office space, and we have, other. We have one called Hera Hub that's just for women-owned businesses. That's in Mission Valley. So there's a lot of different accelerators and incubators where you can get the help you need to get your company off the ground if you're actually forming a company. If you've made the decision to form a company that you're going to run versus licensing your product.
Are there any incubators or accelerators for non-tech, non-electronic, like consumer products or hard?
I don't know of any in San Diego. I haven't heard of any. So another question you have to decide is, are you going to have your product be made in the USA, or are you going to offshore it? Offshore means to have a vendor selected that's out of the United States. Near sourcing is what we call sourcing in Mexico or Canada, but very few products, shall we say, right here in Southern California get sourced in Canada. If we're up in Seattle, Washington, or Oregon, that might be a different story. So this is the thing you have to think about. So the problem we've had in the last 30 years in particular is the decision to offshore was often based on faulty assumptions. Like overseas laws will protect our intellectual property. Overseas suppliers have the same morals and work ethics as we do. Longer lead times won't affect our costs much. Communication won't be a problem with Skype and the internet. Travel costs won't add much to our calculations. And the increase in delivery and quality costs won't be significant. Unfortunately, these assumptions were most often erroneous because there's intangible costs that are also called hidden factories. And that is a phrase that means that everyone is kept busy generating nothing tangible or of measurable value. Hidden factories can be in the form of loss of goodwill because your product doesn't work as your reputation says it's going to, loss of competitiveness, extended warranty costs, and legal costs, especially if your intellectual property was stolen and your selected vendor is selling a product comparable to yours, competitive to yours, out their back door, which can happen in China. So, over the last few years, especially since I first gave this presentation 9 years ago, labor rates in China have risen dramatically, about 800% between 2007 and 2018. The component and material prices have increased, tariffs now on steel and aluminum products, and also automation has increased U.S. productivity. And then we have the exchange rate variables where your invoice that you sold your product at, and with the changing of a dollar value to the yen, may be different, and you may be paying more than you were paying before. So those are some of the variables that are affecting the offshoring. So 9 years, in 2010, so that's 9 years ago now, April 2010, Harry Mosier started the Reshoring Initiative. And he was president of a equipment company that made machining equipment, and he created a worksheet calculator to quantify some of these intangibles, the variables, the hidden costs of doing business offshore. And he started, and total cost of ownership means to have an estimate of all the direct and indirect costs and benefits to purchasing a part. And it actually started as a concept to cover, you know, different things, even real estate. But the problem is most entrepreneurs and most buyers at big companies don't look beyond the quoted piece price. They're just basing it on what's the cheapest piece price to get this part. So you need to understand this total cost of ownership concept. And it should take into these factors: the geographical location, transportation alternatives. Is it going to come from a slow boat from China or a nearby vendor? Inventory costs and controls. If you have to buy big lots of your part and store it, that's a cost of that inventory. The space, the cost of not being able to sell it while you're storing it till it sells. Quality controls, making sure the part was made to your specifications. Having the reserve capacity. Does the vendor have the ability to start low and ramp up if your product sells, or will they be willing to reduce the volume if it doesn't sell as well? Or do you have to continue to buy that certain quantity to get that China price? How responsive are they? Do they have the technological depth to be able to have new generations or design changes of your product and not just be producing a cookie cutter type part over and over again without being able to upgrade to the next generation? So the Reshoring Initiative was started by Harry Mosier, and I happened to connect with him early on. I started blogging in April 2010. He was the first person to sign up to get my blog. We got connected when I wrote an article about why it was important to understand total cost of ownership in August of 2010, and he trained me how to use his total cost of ownership worksheet and authorized me to be his first authorized substitute speaker around the country. So I've given a presentation on total cost of ownership to umpteen different organizations and trade shows, etc. So his objective was to have the mindset be changed from offshore is cheaper to local reduces the total cost of ownership, and to teach OEMs how to calculate TCO, and suppliers and salespersons like myself on how to sell local sourcing to encourage production to be near the customer. So here's an example of, if you use his worksheet calculator and you come up with a price for the product that's going to be in China or any other company, because his worksheet, you can specify the company you're comparing the part to, and then you do the analysis and it comes up with a chart like this for your product, and you can see right now it may be 30% lower, but over a period of time, as the raises as the factors that make up this total cost of ownership change, you will reach an equilibrium point and then eventually be lower compared to China in the future. So we now have data, because when we first had the worksheet, we were just emailing it to people. We didn't know if they used it. We didn't know the results. We didn't know what was happening. So we had to switch it to where they had to go to his website and fill out the worksheet online, and then you would get the calculation and the chart to be able to use. And he's now been able to capture data for the last 7 years. We haven't got the 2018 data crunched yet. So this is a result as of, 2000, based on the 2017 data, that these are the number one reasons why companies are reshoring: quality, rework warranty, freight costs, total costs, delivery, shortened delivery, inventory costs, rising wages in China, supply chain interruptions, intellectual property risk, communication, and even green considerations. Is it being made in a green way versus a polluted way? Because we know everything in China is polluted. So here's some of the reshores that we know about nationwide. This is just a few of many, many now. We actually have, you know, thousands of companies that are reshoring. One in particular, let's see, Whammo. Whammo makes hula hoops. Think of a hula hoop, big round hoop. When it's being shipped from China, what are you shipping? A container full of lots of air. So that's why they are reshored, to make hula hoops in the United States. So it's exciting. So here's some local companies that came back. Diving Unlimited for diving equipment came back from China. Reason, quality, proximity to customers. Think what San Diego, divers, scuba divers, diving equipment, big market right here in San Diego. Closer to your customer if you're manufacturing right here in San Diego. So, emergency lighting, Lightsaver, save costs and reduce delivery time. Actually, 2 to 5% cheaper than when you consider the total cost, and communication was too difficult. These are just a few. Here's some local manufacturers that have reshored. DJO makes orthopedic equipment. Echo ATM, that's the machine where you can get your turn your cell phones in for money. Just get them, turn your cell phone into the equipment. Fluid Master, Seabotics makes underwater, a remote underwater vehicle. Solitube. Solitube actually set up manufacturing in China and brought everything back because they were getting their intellectual, they were very proprietary process, they were afraid of getting their intellectual property stolen, plus they also had made the mistake of having to pay tariffs. They set themselves up in a wrong place in China, and they had to pay tariffs to sell into China. So here's some of the reasons to be sourcing in the US. Obviously, ease of communication, speaking the same language, flexible delivery, reliable transportation, smoother design changes, lower cost of inventory, higher quality, lower travel expenses, no intellectual property infringement, and you get favorable prices because you often have to pay cash up front to get your parts from China. They don't take back defective parts. Don't get any credit for defective parts. So that's one big reason. So, that's it. So those are the, now we're going to work. Leslie will give the guidelines for the worksheets.
Yeah, so before we jump into the worksheets, when you're talking about the manufacturing process, as well as all of the things that Michelle discussed, you really want to think about what is the mission and vision of your company, and what image are you trying to also project? Because in this age of social media and internet, environmental considerations are something that you really should consider. How are you impacting, how are you contributing to sustainable products, and impacts on the environment, and certainly labor issues are a factor. So when you think about that process, whether you're doing it yourself or, and searching for a manufacturer, or you're working through a contract manufacturer, those are things that you should consider asking in terms of how those things impact their business and how they may impact yours. Because the one thing you want to make sure is you don't start your company with a message of whatever it may be, sustainable products, or strong labor force, whatever the message may be, and then come to find out that's not what's happening behind the scenes. You don't want to certainly create a scandal for your company, regardless of whether you've just started or you've been in the business for 20 years, because the damage to your brand and the damage to your reputation is considerable and may be obviously completely detrimental to what it is that you're trying to do. So keep those things in mind as well. Here in the U.S., what's important to think about, certainly what the the big impact that's being felt today is steel imports, right? There is a company in New York. They were in business, I think, 40, 50 years, doing steel and die manufacturing for companies all across the United States. And in 2017, they had to close because they just couldn't afford to stay in business anymore. Companies were looking to outsource, go offshore for cheaper labor, cheaper materials. They closed. And a number, unfortunately at a rapid speed, are closing across the United States. And one of my hobbies on the side is jewelry making. I work with silver and I work with molds, and certainly the materials to make the equipment that we use in the process of jewelry manufacturing is increasing exponentially, where just a small steel stake that I need now costs hundreds of dollars, where just maybe 10, 15 years ago it was maybe a $60 part. So it's becoming increasingly difficult for us in that industry, even though mine is just a hobby. If this were my full-time job where I was trying to sustain a living off of it, that becomes very, very difficult. So those are things to also consider. So what we would like you to do, and we'll talk about other local resources and open up the room for other discussion after. You all were given a worksheet. The purpose of the worksheet is to allow you to have a couple of minutes to brainstorm. And you can do this either by yourself or with a partner. And the worksheet is to give you some insight into your own potential manufacturing process. So as you go through this, think about, if you're going to manufacture your product, work with a contract manufacturer, or seek any sort of outsourcing. These are some of the things we want you to consider. So look at it in that vein. If you're not sure about something or you want to brainstorm with somebody, please pick a partner to do that. We'll give you about 20 minutes or so, because this is a relatively short worksheet, and then we'll discuss it after that. So consider this brainstorming. I know that probably wasn't quite 5 minutes, but most of you look like you're ready to move on, so we will move it on. So first of all, was anyone able to fill out the worksheet completely? Yeah? Okay. Good. I heard a lot of vibrant discussion going on, and I saw a lot of you, I think we're probably working independently, but all in all, the purpose of the worksheets, whether you fill them out tonight or you just simply take them home and fill them out at some other time when you're more invested in this particular process, it's a tool for you to keep as part of your process of going through the idea from concept to commercialization. As far as the worksheet, did anyone have any specific questions or concerns? Was there anything on there that you want to touch on a little bit more? Yes.
On the second row down where the question is projected annual volume. Now is there a industry rule of thumb on how usually a window where we can roll up our volume, let's say like 10% each year, 20% each year, or
So the question is, on the worksheet, there's a question. What is your projected annual volume and useful life of product? Now, I believe the question is there a way to basically scale that up, right, over time? And absolutely. And that's part of working with your manufacturer. Part of that is understanding, where you're going to sell the product, how you're going to sell the product, what your distribution channel looks like, working through that. But generally, yes, there's a ramp up phase where you start small and over time you work through that. The key part of that is really understanding what your process is going to look like, because what you don't want to do is make the mistake of starting with one manufacturer who can only handle small volume, and then you find out, oh my gosh, your interest in your product has just exploded and now they can't meet demand. So either you got to go find a secondary partner that's now going to need time to tool up, ramp up, get things moving, or you may have to shift gears and go somewhere else completely. So part of the process is really kind of is fine-tuning that as much as you can. You want to touch on that too?
Your answer to the first question is really the big thing, because if you're going to be selling to consumers versus selling to other businesses, that's going to be the big differentiator between your projected volume. And you have to look at, yes, you may have to ramp up, and you may not be able to get the right vendor to start off with, because you have to choose a manufacturing process, you know, that's can you ramp up to, like starting with a sheet metal part versus getting into a stamped part, or starting with using, you know, stereolithography plastic parts before you can afford to go into injection molding. Because this is the biggest problem we have right now with plastic parts, is that the tooling costs in Asia are so much less than the tooling costs in the United States that you have to, oftentimes, you know, people have made the mistake to going to Asia for plastic parts because that's where the tooling is cheaper. But you also have no control over the quality. You have no control over, you know, whether they're going to rip off your intellectual property, or whether you're going to have to buy a big lot of parts and wind up with a garage full of parts that didn't sell because you didn't have time to test your market. You know, we have horror stories over the last, you know, 15 years of the Inventors, you know, Forum being in existence, where people, that's what they wound up with. They wound up full of a garage full of parts made in China that they can't sell. So my advice is always to if you can find a plastic molder in the U.S. that may have a relationship with a Chinese vendor to make the tool, bring the tooling back to the U.S. to have the parts run. Because remember, plastic molding is very automated. You're not saving labor because it's so automated. You know, whether they make a 1, 2, 4, 5, you know, 6 cavity mold, depends on how many parts are popping out every few seconds. So that's why you're safer to have a U.S. source for the molding, even if you've had to go to China to be able to afford the plastic tooling, for the tooling for the plastic part. But you need to have those working prototypes first to be able to, especially for a consumer product, to maybe do a Kickstarter campaign to get the money to buy the tooling, and you're validating your market in the process of doing that Kickstarter campaign, Indiegogo campaign at the same time. So then you're raising your money for your tooling by seeing if the product's going to sell. So we've had some success stories of doing that here in the Inventors Forum in the last few years with some of the winners of our invention contest. So that's my advice for thinking about your annual productive volume. You know, there's no real set formula of how you're going to increase your volume, because it totally depends on your product and how well it sells.
Right. But the important thing is, during the interview process, you know, when you're searching for the right manufacturer, that's part of your questions, right? Is how many of the products do they manufacture, what types of products do they manufacture, who do they manufacture for, where are those products distributed, you know, what are the materials, where are they sourced from? A lot of questions go into that, and one of those is, you know, what is their production line capacity, and how many lines do they run, and how often do they run? Because you'll get slotted into a line, right? And so by being slotted into a line, the expectation is that you will produce X number of product over a certain period of time, and once that is done, you're off that line and somebody else is on that line, because they're in business to run that line as much as possible and as often as possible, usually to maximum capacity. But to understand where you fit in that, and then understanding, well, do they have capacity to adjust if you need more, and what does that look like, and what is that going to cost you? Because some of them are at capacity, and they may be able to slot you in for a limited run, but may not be able to ramp up with you. And that may be okay at first if you understand what the pros and cons to that are. Because again, if you've got to ramp up quickly and you don't have someone that can do that for you, you're kind of stuck at that point. So make sure that you understand that as part of your kind of Q&A with your manufacturer. Yes. Do you have a question?
I was thinking the piece price is always in the beginning, more in the beginning, and then as you do more, it goes down. So it's like you've got to, and there's a crossover point. You might want to get yourself a spreadsheet where that mold pays it for itself at a certain unit price. So there is you can calculate this. That's a degree in accounting. You can calculate where it's worth doing the molds and stuff, it's like I do it, wireless FCC is $50,000. So if you're only going to do 500 units, I suggest you buy a module that's already FCC, so that you don't have to pay the $50,000 because it will ruin it. So there's always another way to do it, but if you're just doing it in the beginning to get it out, then you're not going to have any margin.
Yeah, for the fellow I was working his worksheet with, like a metal part, if you have to start out with a sheet metal part, you can save money for turning it into a stamping when you reach about 500 pieces. That's usually where it's more economical to convert a sheet metal formed part into a metal stamping. When you get 500 or above, you're going to pay for the tooling, have a cheaper piece price, and it'll be more economical. And those kind of variables are in place for every kind of part you're making in whatever process you're making it in.
And my experience has been that a plastic part will never be less than 3 times the cost of the material. Is that pretty much what you found to be the case?
Right,
If you got 10 cents worth of material, you never buy that part for less than 30 cents.
right.
So,
Yeah, that's a good rule of thumb. And, it depends on, the complexity of the part, the geometry of the part, the size of the part, obviously. So, and, how many cavities you can have a tool made for. That's in rubber molding, they do it, number of cavities. That's how you get your piece price. So every time the mold is closing, it's making anywhere from 2 to 20 parts. And that's how you save the money.
Any other questions?
I'd like to know more about the liquid rubber molding. I have a customer that we're doing a swim fin. Is that something that would lend itself to that?
It isn't necessarily just the design of the part. It's also it's part design and part volume. Liquid injection molding has its advantages. The difference between liquid injection molding versus injection molding of rubber are the type of machines and the temperature that the material is heated up to. It's a slab of rubber that's heated to be malleable, to be able to stream into a mold for the injection molding, but for a liquid injection molding, the material has to be melted to the point that it turns into a liquid. And that's the difference. And it usually is when the part is higher volume than the mid-volume injection molding, very high volume, and a lot of more medical applications go into the liquid injection molding, and for the silicone materials especially.
So if I sent you an STL of this thing, you could quote it as a rubber mold?
Right.
Yeah, let me do that.
Any other questions?
I saw your line card, my partner is pick up your line card. Is there manufacturers that are experiencing optical stuff?
Optical, manufacturer experience in optical depends on. I actually sold glass fabrication for a while, which was obviously a way that optical parts are made, but San Diego's market didn't have enough customer base and it wasn't worth my time. So my specialty is not optic because we simply don't have much of that industry in San Diego.
There's one company in San Diego that I know is doing microscope type work. I don't know if they're focused solely on their product line right now, if they're taking other things on. If you want to give me your information after, I could send them a message and see.
Have you tried Edmund? EDMUND?
What is your lab equipment?
Yeah, but sometimes they'll do manufacturing for you. I'm working at Philips and they're doing some manufacturing for us. So if you got enough quantity, they'll be interested.
Where are they based at?
Edmund's out of New York.
Okay.
They're big.
Yeah. Big group.
But it's just, it's just a question of how many you need. If you need enough of them, they'll get into the manufacturer and they'll find somebody. Because we're doing a hydrophilic coating machine that needs prisms, and they're manufacturing the prisms for us.
Do you have to give them the or are you sort of able to?
No, what we did is told them how we wanted the light dispersed, and they designed the prism.
So you don't, as a black box, you just,
Yeah.
put it down to the block box.
Yeah. Yeah, that worked out really well.
One thing I can give you information on is how to find some sources that you don't know about. There's two databases that are the most useful. One is ThomasNet, thomasnet.com. It's a national database of manufacturers, and you can look up specific manufacturing processes or materials. The other one is called connectory.com, spelled connectory.com, and it's also a database of manufacturers, and they have a advanced selection so you can actually specify particular manufacturing processes, and you can find companies to select from. It actually started here in San Diego 18 years ago and expanded first to California and then nationwide. It had some federal funding to expand to that. So those are the two databases I can recommend for looking for specific sources for different processes.
What was it,
Connectory.com and ThomasNet.
Yeah, that used to be the Thomas Register. That was a big set of books.
Right, big set of books. The difference is you have to pay to be in the ThomasNet, so only people that have paid are in ThomasNet. Connectory is free, so nobody paid to be in the Connectory. Any other questions? All right, well, I'm available for, to contact via questions. You can pick up a copy of my line card. I write a blog article about manufacturing issues. If you'd like to start getting my blog, you can give me your business card. I also have written 3 books in the last 9 years, and my latest book I have a couple copies of. It's Rebuild Manufacturing, the Key to American Prosperity, and I sell it in person cheaper than you can buy it on Amazon, $20 cash.
Right. Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. So a couple other resources with respect to local manufacturing options. In May, there'll be the Del Mar Electronics and Manufacturing Show. I believe that's May 1st through the 2nd. There are a couple hundred vendors covering all different areas of manufacturing. It's a little scattered. You got to do your work, but certainly go onto the website and look and see who's there. Do a little bit of effort before you go so you don't spend too much time on a kind of like a wild scavenger hunt. But that's definitely a local opportunity. Anaheim just had, if you were on our LinkedIn or Facebook page, you saw that I posted last week, I think it was, a design and manufacturing show that was in Anaheim. So be sure to, obviously the very first and obvious choice is to go on Google and just type in manufacturing trade show or design trade show or engineering trade show. Whatever it is that you need, whatever resource you need, there's a trade show industry for that. So be sure that you take the most simple approach and do some work and look for those. A lot of them are local. Or within driving distance. Obviously, Vegas is the biggest venue for trade shows because who doesn't want to have a trade show in Vegas, right? As far as Vegas, Pack Expo is coming up as well. Look, if you're looking for, because the next step from manufacturing is packaging, right? You got to put it in something to sell it. So Pack Expo is an opportunity to find out more about packaging. And Licensing Expo. Licensing Expo is in June. That is a licensing expo if you are interested in licensing your product. Normally I go to that trade show. I'm involved in going there. It's got some great advantages. They have a lot of vendors, particularly in housewares, home goods, consumer goods, food and beverage, and the biggest is entertainment. If you have something that you want to license or that you're interested in licensing, you can register to go. You can set up and request meetings with vendors on site. You can also, if you want to know, well, what is licensing, or what do I need to know, or how do I get started? I have questions. I don't know what to do. There is a licensing training session that you can sign up for. It's about $200 and something bucks. It's about 3 to 4 days of various training classes that you can go to. They're highly beneficial. You get a lot of information, and you get direct access to experts in the industry. So Google your information.
I'm sorry, is that Vegas?
That's in Vegas. I won't be going this year because I'll be traveling, so I'll miss it this year, but I certainly recommend you going. Also, want to touch, yeah,
When did you say the Vegas trade show was again?
Licensing Expo,
No, the trade show. Did you say that there was?
PAC Expo.
Yes.
I don't have the date on that one, but you can Google that one.
But the licensing expo is in Vegas?
Yes, in June.
June.
June 4th through the 6th, I believe. And the design,
Where's the licensing expo?
And again, Del Mar Electronics and Manufacturing Show is May here in San Diego.
I'll have a booth.
Oh, you'll have a booth. There you go.
And it's free.
Yeah.
Great.
You have one too? You're going to be there? Perfect. So A Square Technology, one of the CMs that was on the on her slide set, and who Danny represents back there, will also have a booth there. Also want to mention Maker Place. Michelle touched on them. They are a great resource. I actually just used them at Christmas time. I was interested in kind of going outside my norm and wanted to get involved in laser etching, and went and took a 30-minute class, and I was up and running with these big, giant, really cool laser machines, and I did glass etching and was able to get some things knocked out for Christmas. And I'll be going back for another project to laser cut large copper sheets for some fencing. So they do they have an open house coming up, I believe next week maybe. Check their website. They also do open tours, so you can go in and just ask for a tour. They also have incubator spaces, so if you have something, you want to start a small business and you want to use their resources, there's incubator space available there. You know, they've got some excellent machinery and tools there that once you're up and running, you are good to go.
So they do memberships and by the day too.
Yeah, I believe. If you take a class, then you get, you know, use for that time, but then they have monthly memberships and all kinds of other resources and availability.
I got a question. It's kind of off topic, but what do you think about Walmart Open Call? You ever heard of that?
The question was, what do I think about Walmart Open Call? I'm not personally familiar with that program and exactly what they're doing, so I can't comment on that, unfortunately. Anyone else used it, been involved? I don't think anyone here has, but yeah. Anything else on that subject? Okay. Let's see. So, you know, we touched on who I was earlier. David is not here, and Sydney is not here, but Tom is here. Tom, where are you? There's Tom. Tom is also in product development and support, as well as being our treasurer and newest FDI representative. Tom, do you want to speak for a moment?
No.
No comment?
No comment on your product development?
No, I'm good, thank you.
Okay.
That's all they need to know.
Alex and Groznia and Danny are all here, as well as Ruth in the hall. Ruth is working on a project, actually making really good headways on her own product, and has been utilizing a lot of resources from this group as well as other resources across San Diego County, winning awards for her product idea, and has been involved in incubator programs and design programs. So there are a lot of resources here in San Diego County. Tap the people in this group. I think Ruth is going to be a good person to speak to in terms of her experience, you know, getting started with coming from really just nothing to really where she's getting right now is getting really close to the end game. Alex, he's our PR, marketing, and social media guy. You want to talk about how you might be able to help others?
If you guys see our postings, just like and share. If you want to see more chairs, do it.
Okay. And Groznia, where you are? Gosney is our PR marketing and website. So we will be doing some major upgrades and changes to our website in the coming weeks and months, so look for that. That's sdinventors.org. So do you have anything you want to add or say? Everybody's so quiet tonight. Danny, hi back there. So as we mentioned earlier, Danny is a representative of A Squared Technologies. A Squared Technologies is the company that Adrian Pelkas, our former president, formed. They're in San Marcos and do contract manufacturing. Danny, you want to promote A Squared?
Yeah, we build a lot of circuit boards and a lot of prototype equipment and stuff, and design work. Pretty much, whatever you need to do. Get all your ducks in order, though. So yeah, we'll manufacture a small quantity of things. So a lot of small turn boards and circuit boards and stuff like that.
Where are you based?
San Marcos.
Oh, with Adrian. Are you working with Adrian?
I'm now the production manager for his company. So he and Amy threw the keys at me. They moved to South Carolina, and
I'm the
I
sales.
miss them dearly, but I got a job out of it. So I'm torn.
I'm the salesperson for A Squared.
And
well, I'm doing the video here, and it's live on YouTube right now. And it will be on YouTube now.
Like and share.
And Danny also helped me on a personal project. As I mentioned earlier, I do jewelry design, and part of that is lapidary equipment. And I've got these large pieces of equipment in my garage that I'm rebuilding, for which I needed some motors. So I went to an auction and bought a bunch of motors, most of which I assumed were still good because they were still in the box. But before I can do anything, I need to test them. I don't know anything about electronics, so he rigged me up a little thing so I don't electrocute myself, and so far it's so good. Yeah, I'm here. So, as I mentioned, LinkedIn and Facebook for this group are your resources. If we find things, if we hear things, whether they're contests, tours, trade shows, information about us, we will post it there. So if you're not a member, please become a member of either one or both. The information that is on one is generally on the other, but it couldn't kill you to double up the efforts on both. Our next meeting will be March 14th. We don't have a topic yet. I'm still working on that. I'm trying to line up a speaker who from a San Diego company who appeared on Shark Tank about a year or more ago, got a deal, is doing great, and so I'm trying to talk to them and see if they will come and present. So stay tuned. If that works out, we'll post that information on the LinkedIn and Facebook websites. So to move on, we do a segment called Who Needs Who. We did a little bit of it already as part of the overall discussion, but this is generally an opportunity for you to stand up and say, hey, this is where I'm at in my process, this is what I need, this is where I'm stuck, I'm looking for this, I'm looking for that. If you have anything like that, you want to speak up and speak about it now, please do. And if the person is here, we can direct you, or we will connect you at some other, and give you some other information about how to connect with them. Who wants to go? Yes?
Does anyone run a successful Kickstarter campaign?
It was successful?
Successful meaning the project got funded, you actually met the first little... No? Anyone run an unsuccessful one?
I have many people that I've worked with that have run unsuccessful ones. I've shot the videos for them, and it's like, man, it's hard getting them to understand that because you gross this, it isn't a net. You know, and you'll never pay for this product doing that. So yeah, a math issue. We have done a lot.
I ran a program for a product called Auto Lock. It's a bicycle lock. Works a lot like a tie wrap. He made $352,000 on Facebook or on
you talked
Kickstarter.
to Funded today?
So it works if you do it right.
Man, Google them. They do free marketing based on commission, but if your product makes money, they pay for any they advertise no budget for any campaign. Funded today. Yeah. So if they sell and your product sells, they'll keep investing into it.
So at some point during our calendar, we will have a topic on funding or how to basically raise money for your product to get it to market. And we'll get people in here who hopefully have had some experience in not only angel investors, capital investors, Kickstarter, any of these other bootstrapping sort of campaigns. And that'll be a topic all into itself. Again, we don't have that scheduled yet because we're trying to pull different people from different experiences. So stay tuned for that.
You should have Jen come talk to us about Kickstarter. She's really heavily into that. Jen Amos runs that Social Turtles.
Okay, give me her information after.
Yeah.
Okay.
The whole point to Kickstarter is you have to prime the pump.
Yeah.
Because when you go on Kickstarter, you're only on the front page for 2 weeks. So if nobody knows you or knows what you're looking for, then they're not going to come to your page. But you can do things like Jen Amos runs a company called Social Turtles, and for a fee, she will blog on the internet and say that, not trying to sell it, she'll say that in February there's going to be something on Kickstarter that's so-and-so and that's really interesting and you ought to check it out. And she'll do like 60,000 numbers to get you to Kickstarter.
Yeah, the key to
Driving traffic to it.
Yeah, that's it. That's the key. Those campaigns people don't just find them kind of organically.
No,
you got to market the hell out of them. And so having
There's something like 400,000 products a year.
yeah. So
Well, and everybody seems to do pretty good the first 2 weeks. I put 3 people on Kickstarter, and they all made $10,000 in the first 2 weeks, but then you drop off the front page and your revenue goes away. So you really need to prime the pump and get people that are ready to go and are going to be looking on it on the 20th of February for this really neat thing. That's really the secret to Kickstarter.
yeah, and so when we talk about marketing, a lot of people think the marketing and marketing plan comes after you've already got the product ready to go and you're ready to sell. Your marketing starts way, way before that. Your marketing starts almost at concept, right? You got to figure out who is your market, what is it you're trying to sell, where you're going to sell it, how you're going to sell it. All that lays the foundation for all of your marketing as you go through the entire process and cycle. So when you're talking about opportunities like this, whether it's going on an internet web approach to funding or going in front of a room full of investors, it's marketing. You've got to have that as part of your plan. So if you don't know how you're going to market it, how are you going to market to people who want to invest or become vested in your product? Because again, they're not going to, the internet is a great thing and you hear about these overnight sensations and things going viral, but a lot of that is not happen by mistake. It's calculated. And so you've got to kind of factor all of that in, because like you said, there's hundreds of thousands of products on Kickstarter and Indiegogo and all these other kind of startup, self-funding, crowdsourced sites. But you've got to have the ability and resources to get people to go there and find you. And part of that is through Facebook, some of that is through LinkedIn, Instagram and all social media platforms. Again, on a future topic, we're going to talk about marketing and all those various aspects, including social media and digital. So we'll kind of bring all these things as they all kind of come back together full circle. Did you have something you wanted to add?
Oh, we had, I mentored one of the companies for a Connect Springboard program a couple of years ago that did do a lot of social media kind of, marketing on, with Facebook and so forth, and going to different events. They made the personal jet for propelling yourself through water, Bixby, and but you also have to set a realistic goal of how much money to raise, because you have to meet your goal to be able to get any of the money. If you don't reach your goal, whatever raised goes back to the people. So you have to have a realistic goal to begin with and achieve that goal within the 30 days that you have to market it. So that's when and they actually did one unsuccessful campaign, but that led to their next one succeeding, and they did raise all the money they needed to get the product made and into the market. And I get their newsletter, and they're now selling, well. So that was 2 years ago, 3 years ago.
Great. Anything else? Anyone?
I think last year the most raised was 16 million.
By one company?
Yeah, they sell backpacks.
Wow.
But here's the thing: when you sell one product, you get all that email list. So you email them again when you have a second product. This was their fourth product.
So they kind of built up a list.
Yeah,
and then
they had
added
that
some.
list.
So even if it's just to build up a list.
Yeah, I
it's
think
working
it's also a whole bunch of other lists.
Okay. Anyone else have a question? Who needs who? Product, resource, help, question?
There's a bunch of math on clocks and this clock.